the performance of the GTX 1080 compared to two RX 480s in CrossFire? And in order to address this issue, we have our hands on a version of the GTX 1080, and we're going to be taking one of those cards and putting it against HIS RX 480s in CrossFire to see which setup comes out on top gaming. So if you're interested in seeing which solution has the best overall gaming performance. Now, before we tell you our performance results, let's get into the specifications of a single RX 480 from HIS and the MSI Aero version of the GTX 1080. Now, in terms of shader cores or processors, a single RX 480 is going to have around 2300 stream processors. So with two of them, we're going to have over 4600 stream processors, which is definitely going to be very competitive compared to a single GTX 1080 that has about 2560 CUDA cores in total. Now, in terms of the clock speed, our HIS RX 480 is clocked around 1267 megahertz on its boost frequency versus the GTX 1080 goes well above 1700 megahertz, which is definitely a lot faster. In terms of the memory specifications, we're using the 8 gigabyte version of the RX 480, so we're going to have over 16 gigabytes of GDDR5 memory, clocked in around 8000 megahertz. A single GTX 1080 has about 8 gigs of GDDR5X memory, but it's clocked in over 10,000 megahertz, which is pretty darn insane. In terms of memory interface, both platforms have a 256-bit memory bus, so we're kind of similar in terms of the overall bandwidth of memory on both cards. Now, in terms of our benchmarking rig, we're going to be using our old trusty Intel Core i7 6700K system paired with the Asus Z170 Deluxe motherboard with about 16 gigs of DDR4 memory. Check out the link in the description for detailed information about all the equipment we're using for our benchmarking setup. If you guys are familiar with the RX 480, you know that there's kind of a controversy going on with how much power it utilizes through the PCI Express connector. Now, based on the information out there, most people who are using contemporary motherboards such as the Z170 or X99 are really not affected too much. It's only with people using older chipsets where it's giving you some issues there. But luckily, there are going to be driver updates to address this issue. I didn't have any major problems with any crashing or any hardware errors based on my current copies of the HIS RX 480s. But in terms of the power consumption with two RX 480s in CrossFire, it's definitely going to take a lot more power than a single GTX 1080, which hovers around 180 watts versus the RX 480s in CrossFire with just the GPU themselves are going to draw almost over 300 watts, which is definitely a significant amount of power. You want to make sure you have a decent amount of power supply if you're going to do any kind of multi-GPU setups. Now, in terms of the load temperatures, both cards pretty much on kind of factory settings hit just above 80 degrees C at full 100% load, not gaming load. This is using firmware, so more of an extreme test. And the coolers on both platforms are not very good. They're both blower style coolers, so they're not the best in terms of overall cooling efficiency, and in terms of noise, they're definitely not going to be good as some of the other fancier aftermarket coolers. The two RX 480s at gaming load are extremely loud. I measured almost 46 decibels when playing Crysis 3, which is definitely very loud compared to the 34 decibels we have on the MSI version of the GTX 1080, which is not the fancy cooler that they employ. This is the more cheaper blower style cooler that is, again, not the best thing out there, but it comes at a lower price tag. Now let's finally move into our performance benchmark results. We're going to take a look at a 3D Mark Firestrike, and as you can see over here, this is a perfect synthetic benchmark. So real-world gaming will always vary in terms of the actual performance results, as you're going to see later on down the road. But initially, it looks like the dual CrossFire configuration with RX 480s is actually doing really, really good, beating out the GTX 1080 in pretty much every setting from 1080p to 4K resolution, but not by a huge margin. If you take a look at some other results such as GTA 5 over here, you are going to notice that the Crossfire configuration doesn't really scale up like it does in most synthetic benchmarks in real-world gaming applications, where you can see a significant difference between the GTX 1080 and a Crossfire configuration with RX 480s. You can also see at the bottom, I've thrown in the results for the GTX 1070, which is also from MSI, the Aero version. It's pretty much the exact same same cooler as our GTX 1080, so things are as equivalent as possible. So I'm gonna now be quiet. You can take a look at some of our other real-world gaming benchmark results and determine which one is best for you. So let's get right into it.